All right, here we go. Okay, let me call to order the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency meeting for today, May 25th. If you'll please rise. Dave, will you lead us, please?
Would you put your hand over your heart and follow me, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call.
Roll call. Chair Mulhard?
Here.
Vice Chair Craven?
Here.
Director West?
Here.
Director Borchard?
Here.
Okay, and I've been advised that Director Bennett will join us here shortly. Also, I saw there's Robert Ranios in the audience. There's Andy Waters in the audience. I don't see any other alternates. Okay. Agenda review, Jeff?
Chair Mulhart, suggestion would be that you take item 4 and move it to the top of the regular agenda. There may be a number of people in the audience who are here just for that item, as your board desires.
Do I hear any objection to making that change?
No.
Okay, so ordered. We'll deal with item 4 first. Okay. All right. Board member comments.
Public comments?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Public comments. Anybody in the public want to address the GMA board on items not on the agenda? Okay. Any board member comments? Dave?
Yes, Chair. I am pleased to, at this time, the committee has decided a few months ago on the recipient of the John K. Flynn Annual Groundwater Stewardship Award. And so if I may, I'd like to read this citation here for our awardee. This annual award recognizes an individual or entity that has contributed the most to protecting groundwater, enhancing water quality, or assisting the GMA in efforts to manage the water resources that are so vital to this area. The 2016 recipient of the annual Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency Groundwater Stewardship Award is someone recognized for their commitment to water resources in Ventura County. This person believes in the rights of water users while also recognizing the need to protect our water resources. Though the issues can often be difficult, thoughts are offered in a reasoned and articulate manner. This person contributes to a variety of local forums on water policy and management, but you may often find them participating in the Los Pozos Users Group and that group's efforts to allocate groundwater and establish the framework for a water market, participating in the Irrigation Allowance Index reporting process to ensure it's fair and equitable, that all users are reporting correctly, and keeping tabs on staff, the agency's consultant, and the technical advisory group to ensure the groundwater sustainability plans represent the needs and interests of stakeholders. The recipient understands that changes must be made to ensure the long-term sustainability of groundwater. This person is solution-oriented and offers constructive ways to address matters at hand. Furthermore, staff will often consult with this individual to gauge stakeholder acceptance of an idea or even whether or not it will work. This individual is viewed by all as being willing to help and doing it well. In summary, today's winner was chosen for her willingness to do more than just agree or disagree with the direction of the agency. She represents the interests of stakeholders with grace and civility, yet fights to preserve the rights of her organization and the health of our groundwater resources. Please join me in congratulating the 2016 recipient of the annual Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency's John K. Flynn's Groundwater Stewardship Award, which goes to Carol Schoen.
Carol, we have something for you, so why don't you go around the corner and come all the way up here, would you please? Dave. Well, yeah, come on up here. Everybody can see. I thought by now it would have leaked out and you would have heard about it. So you folks did a great job of keeping the secret. So, anyway.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Way to help be on the call.
Oh,
My pleasure.
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Well deserved.
Oh.
You were surprised, I can tell. Okay, thanks, Dave. You actually got a twofer out of it. You got an award and you got to come up here. You said you'd never been up here. Whatever that's worth, I don't know.
We can change that.
Yeah, we can change that. Yeah, there you go. All righty, other board members, any comments? Okay, let's go ahead and deal with the consent agenda.
Move the approval.
A motion to approve and a second. Any corrections, adjustments? Hearing none, so ordered. Okay, let's go to item number 4. Alma.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wall, Watershed Director. For the record, my name is Alma Quezada with the County of Ventura Watershed Protection District. Last month, staff was directed to proceed with an AMI workshop, which was held yesterday. To reach as many stakeholders as possible, we sent out 417 postcards and 207 emails. We also updated the agency website to include information about the upcoming workshop, as well as a link to the proposed draft ordinance. We also posted the workshop information outside of this building. We had a total of 66 attendees at the workshop. So kudos to all the stakeholders for coming out and participating. We received a lot of valuable input and comments. I have a summary of the comments, questions, and concerns brought up during the workshop. I'm not going to read all of them. You should have a printed copy in front of you, but I do want to give you a sampling of the feedback we received in no particular order of importance. Starting with some general comments. The item should not be decided at the May 25th board meeting. Another comment, general comment, cost is important. The program must identify who pays for the equipment, installation, and maintenance. And should the program be mandatory? Article 4 comment, a January 1st, 2007 deadline is too soon and unreasonable. Article 5 was a popular one that relates to the inspection of the flow meter or the AMI device. So some of the comments relating to that, the language was offensive and insensitive to private property rights because of the concept that the agency has unlimited ability to enter a house or any structure. Another comment stated, revise the language to state reasonable notice rather than at any and all reasonable times. And another comment, no access to property by GMA staff, but GMA may require meter certification by third party. Article 6 should clarify, a comment that was made that it should clarify that semi-annual reporting will not be required if the ordinance is adopted. Article 7 was another popular section. Some people commented to leave the Article 7 in the draft, but with better language. Others said that the opt-out clause permitted inaccurate reporting to continue, which means inaccurate reporting will occur 12 times a year. And another comment stated, AMI implementation may be a burden on small growers, and Article 7 should be modified to state that growers using less than a certain amount of groundwater per year be excluded from the requirement to install a metering reporting system, but still report as required in Article 7. A comment relating to Article 8 said that the fact that extra time can be requested to comply means that you must comply. It is not optional. And Article 9, which relates to the enforcement of the ordinance, the general consensus was that $1,000 a day for noncompliance is too steep. So going back to Article 5, I just want to point out that Resolution 2008-4, Section 4, already has a language specifying the inspection, which states that a minimum of 24 hours notice will be provided to the well owner or operator prior to any well visits or inspections. Staff suggests amending Article 5 of the proposed ordinance to match the language we have previously adopted. So, staff was also directed to return with a draft ordinance as the initial template. We're still going through the comments, and some revisions need to be made to incorporate those comments. You may want to consider bringing this item back to the June fiscal meeting and also to the June hearing with a revised ordinance that incorporates the feedback we receive.
Okay, all right. Hold on, any members have any questions for Alma?
I just had one. There were a couple of references to a resolution that was necessary to affect some of the, whether it was the technical specifications or some of the other requirements in the ordinance. Any idea when we'll see a draft of the resolution that's the companion to the proposed ordinance?
I think it's going to depend on whether the ordinance is adopted or not. What is the usual timeline? Al, what's the usual timeline for?
Well, there's no real timeline. The resolution will require the development of technical standards, so I would refer that back to staff for an estimate of how long it will take them to develop those.
And the only reason I ask is that I thought the resolution was going to identify the technical standards, and depending upon those standards, that may have some bearing on the implementation or the inception date of any action due under an ordinance. That's why I wanted to make sure that we weren't picking an inception date without technical specifications and then ultimately see technical specifications that make the ordinance impractical. It might be a good idea to bring it all back together.
Okay.
Okay, any other member comments? Okay, I'm going to go to the audience here. Let me, let's deal with the first big elephant that I think is in the room, and that is under general comments. The recommendation, this item should not be decided on the May 25th, 2016 board meeting. So, from a board standpoint, are members in agreement that that's not what we're going to do today, is decide this thing? We're going to talk about it. We're going to get some instruction about it. We're going to give staff some instruction about it. We're going to hear from the audience. But we're not going to vote on this draft policy, ordinance blank, today. Everybody okay with that? All right. So for the audience, we do have a copy. I think you saw it outside, or at least we have a copy of all the general comments. As I just indicated, I don't see us deciding on this issue today. We're not going to vote on it today. I think that today would be helpful if folks want to make comments to emphasize some of the things they think are important. As Alma said, she did not go through every line item within this comment, question, and concern article. And at some point, we have to direct staff to take all this information and put it back together in some kind of usable form so we can have a continued discussion on this item. And staff, I think Alma suggested we could do that one at the June fiscal meeting, which is June 1. That's a pretty short turnaround. I just don't see that functional. We have a fiscal meeting on June 1, the committee meeting. So it may be that we have to create another meeting if that's necessary, or we do it some other way to get it back to the June agenda so we can look at it again. So those are kind of general comments so that folks in the audience have some sense of where I think the board is going at this point in time, so that we have a discussion of items that you think are important for us to consider without making the assumption that we're going to pass this thing today and be done with it. That's not going to happen.
Mr.
Okay.
Chair, I just have one comment. She said that staff was looking to make changes in accordance with what was here. I think it's important. I mean, there are conflicting things here, so
Yes.
everything is not going to be put in. So if something's really important to somebody, they need to tell us.
Yes.
So we can make a judgment and direct staff as to what we think should be in.
Okay.
And there won't be an expectation that everything in here will be in the
Okay.
new ordinance.
I think. All right. So,
Alma, I think the last time you presented this, you indicated that there might be a very small percentage of folks for whom technical compliance wasn't possible because the signal didn't reach or whatever.
That's correct. I have
But
been, the way I've been told is that they do a radio propagation map study to know exactly who will be excluded from being able to connect into the network, and they estimate that that's going to be fewer than 1%.
But as drafted, the ordinance is prophylactic in its application and doesn't make any provision for somebody who is unable to comply, however willing, is unable to because they're outside the signal.
That is correct.
Maybe something, you may need to either
okay.
fine tune that or.
All right. So what we're going to do now. Yeah. Those are the comments. Steve, what we've just done, Alma has given us a very quick summary. She hadn't read all these items to us. And while you were out, I raised the issue on May 25th, one of the general comments, that we would not decide this issue at today's board meeting. That's not staff's recommendation. And so that folks don't believe we're going in that direction, I'm trying to hopefully calm some folks down if that's the case and have a discussion on specific issues that folks feel very concerned about or passionate about, and we'll have that for the record, and then we'll make a decision on what we direct staff to do following that. Okay? So anybody in the audience want to speak on those that were at that workshop yesterday? Anybody want to speak on those items?
Or who wasn't there?
Or who wasn't at that item? Yes, sir.
Hi, Jared Bouchard, General Manager at the Channel Islands Beach. Let me start by saying I thank you for the workshop yesterday, and your staff did a fantastic job of laying out what it is they know today. I think Director West's comments with regard to how this process is moving, it's a little awkward in that we're trying to put a resolution forward, but we don't even understand how the program will be implemented. Who's going to own the equipment? How's it going to reach back? From a public agency standpoint, we have concerns with the GMA moving forward with a sole proprietor and our ability to just directly contract with them to ensure that we can communicate directly. We did raise the issue of January 17th, as maybe some public agencies don't have budget appropriations out for this program within our adopted budget, and we would need some time to go through the RFP process. I don't think the time frame's a big issue for the GMA, but I think you ought to give real due consideration to Director West's comment, and that's developing all the technical standards, who's going to own it, what that is, before you come up with the ordinance for implementation. I think it would help the rest of us understand how it moves ahead. We are supportive of the program, would like to see it move ahead, but I think we have some work to do, and there's no hurry in that context. We can put the framework together. It would help the rest of us feel a little better, I think. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Can I ask a question? So when you say who owns it, are you referring to the meters?
Yeah.
I'm referring to the radio telemetry equipment in and of itself. The meters, I think I understand everybody already has a requirement to own their own meter. Then the telemetry equipment, it's been my experience with this kind of equipment, a lot of this stuff doesn't communicate really well. And for some of us that have already infrastructure in place, figuring out how we would integrate this into it to ensure it communicates with whatever the GMA is putting together to gather that data could be problematic and take some time as well. And as I said, we have certain rules when we go out and buy equipment to use a sole source. We need to figure out how we do that as well if that's the GMA's direction.
What is your preference in terms of who actually owns the telemetry equipment?
I think that's part of what needs to be grappled with here, because there's real operational challenges for GMA. If the equipment's owned by other folks and it fails, then how do you get it up and running? Certainly from a municipal supplier standpoint, that's why we own the equipment ourselves, so that we can ensure that it's going. But I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth that as someone who pays GMA pump fees, I don't particularly feel the need to purchase the equipment for everybody else or fund that as well. So.
Well, I mean, that's a perfect comment. I mean, you could say, I don't know, but here's something you should think about on this side and that side. That's exactly what this is for. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Jürgen.
Excuse me, Jürgen Gramko speaking on behalf of the Oxnard Pleasant Valley Landowner Group. We support the telemetric metering in broad concept. Article 4 is fine. We are not in favor of unnoticed, unfettered access. I think access needs to be noticed. Ultimately, meters could be checked by third parties, just like they're certified now by third parties, just like backflow preventers are certified by third parties. As general comment, we private property owners have concerns about the county going beyond its mission when it comes time to look at meters. And then finally, on the alternate reporting requirements, we think that the opt-out should not be just a decision that's made by somebody that doesn't want to put on a meter. I think everybody should be required to have meters. If the meters don't work for a technical reason, then they should have some other alternative, or if there's a de minimis amount of water in terms of a domestic well or something like that. But if you're going to do this for accurate information, then everybody ought to be subject to it. Thank you.
Okay.
Question for you. When you were talking about unfettered access, do you have any concern that if notice is required, that somebody could game the system because when they were noticed and they were able to go out and do something? I don't know anything about metering and stuff. Is that a concern?
Sure, that would be a concern. But, this is a sort of a balance between government oversight and private property. And, you'd have to be pretty devious to be doing that. I think the appropriate thing is notice or third-party access. I mean, just as a completely off-the-wall example, I got a phone call this morning from Casitas Water, and Casitas Water says, we think you have a leak at your house. I'm like, how do you know that? And they said, well, the sanitation district called and said our lift station is running more frequently than it should. I'm like, so with all of this information, my point is that if there's something out of the ordinary, you'll see it. And at that point, you can make the phone call and notice the visit and ultimately check for tampering.
And my other question is, when we addressed this issue before, we've had this issue of going on the property come up before. When we addressed this before, we had a committee meeting, and by the time we get to the end of that committee, people were comfortable if the directions to the inspectors were that they were only to focus on the water meter, and that they were not there to report a building violation or any of that other stuff. And that seemed to be a place where people settled at the committee meeting when we were done with that. Would that kind of direction be help you in terms of this?
Certainly that would be helpful, yes.
Great, thank you.
Jürgen, this may not answer the underlying assumption, but it was said at the special board meeting, you said it again today, that the county is coming onto the property and whatever. I remind folks, you were in the audience when we did this 20 years ago, I guess, maybe, and I read from our stationery. The Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, a state of California water agency. We're not a county agency. So when we say that I don't want the GMA to come on and do the kinds of things and limit what they can look at or not, it's not the county. If the issue really is irrelevant, it is in fact an outsider coming on, a government agency coming on, then that's a different question. But if it's purely the county, we don't want the county on our property. The GMA is not the county, and that may be semantics, but in fact it's true. And maybe you have to come up with something that Steve has talked about, or maybe a third party. But those are some of the things I think we have to talk to staff about, figuring out how do we make this thing work. Because I agree with you, we need to have the meters. We need to know exactly, if we're going to put pumping restrictions or allocations or whatever it is.
I mean, if you do water marketing, clearly you have to have some very accurate meters.
Because we've had folks, you've heard it before, where people say you can't do what you want to do because you really don't have valid data. And the loop just keeps going around and around and around. We got to get out of that loop system.
Listen, we fully support valid data, and to the extent that our position on metering without an opt-out clause is a reflection of the fact that this is something everybody needs to do because we need as accurate a database as we can get. I think that shows that, we're all in for this. But this is just the natural tension that a property owner has when, somebody from the county comes around and then they look at your 40-year-old barn that's leaning over and say, that doesn't meet building and safety codes, and now you're into fixing your barn when it started out with your meter. That's the kind of thing we want to avoid.
Okay. All right. Anybody else want to speak on this issue?
Good afternoon, Jeanette Lombardo. Today I'm speaking as State President for California Women for Agriculture. We have a very policies in regards to this that are very stringent. I'll go a little step further than Jurgen. When anyone buys a piece of property, anyone, you get 4 rights: land, water, air, and mineral. A lot of the actions that's been taken strip those rights or severely limit them, and that is not acceptable. Access on the property by anyone, county, state, my father-in-law, if I don't want him, should not be allowed. The question, and of all the comments that have been given here, I wasn't there yesterday. I was at the United Water budget meeting. I don't see any comments in regards to the data. Who owns the data? Are we selling the data? What are we doing with the data that's coming to the county? That also needs to be handled. I agree that we need the meters. How they can and should be read is the question that seems to be the underlying issue here. And Steve, I appreciate all your work that you've done in water. But sometimes I don't appreciate your tone and your implications, and I know you don't mean it. And I know you think there's a lot of non-reporting happening out there, but I think going through the exercise that we just went through with irrigation allowance index, and for the first time matching up wells with land use, it was a brand new exercise for everyone, and there was some farmers out there that thought their water purveyor was doing it and they weren't required to do it. So just the implication that there's this huge amount of people out there that are trying to, buck the system and not do what they're supposed to do, I don't buy it. until all the other counties in this state get up to where we are at and doing what we're doing, I think you should be happy that we're here doing what we've done so far voluntarily, and we continue to have these stakeholder meetings and be cooperative in this regard. Thank you.
Okay, anybody else? Brian?
Brian Bonnie Kaigas. I appreciate Mr. Gramkow's comments about making it mandatory for everybody. I just want to be sure that if there are situations where the technology cannot be applied to existing meters, that we consider having some other way of dealing with that. As you know, Kaigas owns 18 high-capacity ASR wells with injection and pumping meters, as well as flushing meters on our flushing lines. So all told, we have many dozens of meters that would need to be retrofitted. No problem, I think, if the technology can plug in and communicate with our existing infrastructure and SCADA system. But if we're in a position where we're now having to replace our magnetic meters, which each are many thousands of dollars, we're talking about a considerable sum of money. So just please keep that in mind as you move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Anybody else? Okay, members. Dave?
Second, I'm
Who
writing.
wants to go first? Charlotte?
I was still writing, just a second.
All right, Steve?
I appreciate the comments about who owns it. That does, I really made me go, yeah, that's right. Who replaces it if it doesn't work? On the other hand, should everybody be paying for, for those meters or so? Fair question, and I'm not sure what is the right policy, so I look to staff to work on that some more. In terms of the opt-out, I would be in agreement that it should be very tight in terms of the opt-out. And what I would throw out as a potential solution for that is that the opt-out ought to be for reason, for cause, and that cause should be something that first goes to the executive director or the head of the Fox Canyon agency, not this board, to review. And then if that opt-out request is approved, that should be approved here too, so that everybody out here, you guys are going to play an important role in sort of monitoring each other. And so it's just a public thing. Hey, Jurgen wants to opt out. People say that's baloney, or that makes sense. And this board has the ultimate right to approve or not approve that. That's what strikes me as thing. If it's something as important as this water, and that would be the kind of opt out, rather than it be somebody just decides they're going to opt out and all they have to do is meet these requirements, which is report and not blow up more than 3 times. That just enters. It's like, no, there needs to be a reason why we even start that. Now, once you are in the opt out, you still have to report properly, and if you don't follow through, you lose something as a result. So that's what I think would be the right thing there. This issue of unchecked, or you have to get permission to be able to go on the property and all of that stuff. I have to take a quick 30-second thing. I've never said a whole lot of people or everybody's out there, but I would offer this, that our job is, it doesn't matter whether it's a lot of people or a few people. It erodes people's confidence in the system if people believe that people can get away with something. And if we're setting up something as important as this, as important as water in Ventura County, with as much money involved, we have a responsibility to ask those questions and deal with those issues. It's not a disparaging thing on everybody. But I would offer to you that since we decided to go to water markets, we've had more people come to us and say, yeah, you need to do that, because there are people out there that are fudging. They don't tell me how many, but if there's any, then we have a responsibility to do that. So that being said, I want to hear more about what kind of situations might require the unnoticed checking of a property. I would think that we should set up this thing where 99% of the time it's noticed. Hey, we think there's a problem. We want to come out. We need to check this. That all seems fine. but I guess I would like to get some analogies from the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission, when they set up the stock market. There must be times when they can do something unnoticed because they need to preserve whatever it is that they need to preserve to keep that from happening. I don't know how that all applies to water meters, but I just offer that as a probably overly dramatic analogy, but one that applies. So I would be interested in the notification to put in the safeguard that we agreed to a couple of years ago at this commission, which was the big thing that I think you said is people don't want them looking at your barn while they're there. That they're only there for that, and that we actually have a policy so that they're not to come back and report other things. That strikes me as keeping their eye on the ball, and the thing that we're most interested. We're contracting with the county for this information. We're not contracting with the county staff to then go out and do all this other stuff. So we're contracting for this information. What do we need to know about this particular meter? Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Charlotte?
Yeah, I pretty much agree with what Steve said, but I think we just need to clarify a little bit. We're not checking the water meters. This is under this. This is checking the equipment that reads the meter and sends it on to somebody else. I think it is a valid point of what do we do with the data once we get it. Everybody in the world, from Facebook to any little website, has to disclose what they're going to do with the data they collect, and I think we need to tell people what we're going to do with this. If we're only going to use it privately, if we're going to sell it to the whole world so everybody knows how much water you're using, whatever it is, we need to specify in the resolution or whatever what we're going to do with this data, because I think that's getting more and more important to people. I agree that we need to talk about who owns the telemetry equipment and who's going to pay to have it put in, and who's going to pay for the upkeep and the maintenance, because all of that's important. We got the ability, I can't remember, time seems to, the older I get, the less I keep track of time, but it was 1 year ago or 2 years ago that the law changed, and we had the ability, and we changed what we needed to go on people's property. And so we would only be using that. This would not be for coming on every month to read the meters. This is only if we suspect there's something wrong with this particular piece of equipment, or something needs to be checked, or it's the amount of water that it appears people are using from the reports is really strange. And I do believe we need to make it clear to people, either through minutes or something, that whoever comes out will be coming out to check this particular piece of equipment. Personally, and I read all of this, and it seems there are a lot of people who are concerned about county employees going on, and notwithstanding what you said, we contract with the county, so if people we contract with now were going out to check the equipment, they would be county employees, even though they're contracted to us. I personally would rather have a public employee coming on my property than some stranger. And I know everybody feels differently, but I think that there's more accountability if we are using public employees. So those are my thoughts on this. As for, there were a lot of comments about the January 1st deadline is too soon. If we were to adopt this in June, that would be 6 months' notice. I think we need to make sure that whoever's going to supply the equipment, especially if it's a sole source, would have enough equipment for everybody to be able to have it in time to have it installed by January 1st. That's my only comment on that. And those are my comments.
Okay. Gene?
Just a couple with respect to inspections. The concept of a third-party inspector is not a bad idea, particularly if there are some reliable resources that the GMA can contract with to make that service available at the expense of the well operator. If it's not going to be staff and the preference is for a third party, as long as the well operator is willing to pick up that cost and the source is reliable, it's not a bad alternative. As far as the I agree with Charlotte. I think something in terms of data management might be important to have in the audience, just to give, in the ordinance, just to give everybody some confidence that the data is not going to be distributed or used for some other purpose. I'd like to hear more at some point, I guess, from staff about the concept that's came up about
What article?
exempting, it's article, I guess Article 7, about exempting small users or users below a certain level. I don't know whether that makes sense given the big picture or not, but I'd be interested in some analysis of that. As far as the opt-out, I'm not a big fan of the opt-out. I like Steve's compromise with respect to, bringing it here so we can evaluate, collectively and publicly whether somebody should opt out. But given the overall purposes of the program, I'd rather
feasible.
spread it far and wide.
Okay, Dave?
I agree also, the opt-out concept, just purely because you don't feel like it, doesn't seem reasonable. Other people are investing in technology and trying to do the right thing. And for the water markets to succeed, we have to have a bona fide, even playing field. I was at the meeting yesterday, and the thing that I learned that I thought was important was that the cities are, in particular, concerned about how their existing investments in telemetry equipment that they use and whether it is compatible with what we're proposing. And I think that's very important. It doesn't seem reasonable to make the M&I folks have to redo their whole established setup that already works in their system and in their billing programs and everything else. It would seem possible that the consultant could make the electronics communicate. So that would be a major point, I think, that we ought to pursue. The other thing the consultant said yesterday was that 70% of the meters were micrometer meters, and it seemed to be indicated that many of those were retrofittable, meaning that a new meter wouldn't need to be purchased. And then I heard from others this morning at LPUG that, in reality, by the time you go through the cost of retrofit and recalibration, you're sometimes at not much of a different price point of replacing the meter. So I guess it all depends on what needs to be done. But perhaps a little more information for us on that would be beneficial. There were quite a number of comments yesterday on the cost and the cost that was advertised versus the cost that many folks in the audience had incurred. And so some sort of reconciliation on perhaps even just a range would be perhaps helpful, particularly if we're thinking about how this gets paid for. Regarding the unfettered or unannounced access, maybe that's something that I still don't like the idea of just surprise inspections, but perhaps if we've got non-compliant people after multiple notices who still fail to even answer the phone or reply, then perhaps there's a process then that we can institute. I think we should be careful about private property rights, and in other discussions of this nature, we've talked about getting warrants and doing things the proper way. It's time-consuming, yes, but we ought to follow the procedures we've kind of done in the past, I think. That's about all I have.
Okay, as I've listened, I've kind of made some notes here, and I've put them in some kind of order because I think we're at that stage of giving direction to staff, and I've watched Jeff write feverishly over there, so he's been listening. In no particular order, the issue of opt-out, paragraph 7, that needs to be worked on, and I know you've said that, you've told me that has to be worked on, so we're going to have to make some adjustments on that. The issue of data, what is the boundary or box or limitations associated with data? We've got to address that issue. I think it is a valid question for those individual entities, cities, mutuals, water agencies that have invested in a very sophisticated SCADA system. We've got to figure out how to integrate that system into this reporting process so we don't trigger a giant, I mean, you talk about the number of meters you have. United, we've got bunches of meters. PV's got meters. Everybody's got meters that are in the public agency part of the equation. We got to figure out how to get that telemetry. I see Dave's in the back. You know, how does this thing talk together in the process? The issue of the deadline came up, and it's an issue that I think right now is probably going to be a little bit of a moving target depending upon the wording you come up with this initial draft. So I don't see how we can get a handle around bringing the aquifers into balance unless we have this reporting process in place. I think it's significant that we looked at this issue 2.5 years ago. We had a state grant in front of us, $1.5 million or whatever the amount was. And at the time, the technology was to basically put a camera looking at the meter, and we determined that that was really impractical and expensive. Yeah, and cellular in nature, and so the monthly cost is outrageous. Technology has now caught up with the problem we identified. We need to capitalize on that. So that leads me to an issue that we really haven't chatted with, and it's a subset of who owns the meter. And we need to work through that because I would encourage that we start figuring out what the target grant funding might be to help this process. But I don't want to condition implementing this on getting grant funding, because that grant funding process is no guarantee, and it has delays built into it, which delays the whole process. But I think the public needs to know that it's an issue that we're looking at on what can we do with a certain amount of grant funding. As I read part of this document and whatnot, there was some discussion, I believe, I was not at the meeting, I was at United's meeting, happened to be at the same time, about maybe there is a separate pump charge that we allocate for a period of time to help bring this system on board. All those issues of funding have to be addressed. I don't know what the correct answer is. The other big issue, and that funding and that cost issue are all tied together, but we have to address it. And then the other one was the access of third party. Steve gave an opinion on a compromise that might work. Gene talked about a different form of a third party. We need to figure out what that box is and how we're going to do that. I will remind folks that we had this discussion before the GSA was created. We authorized the agency to go to Sacramento and get authority for the agency to go on to private property because of the nature of this issue. So that issue, we've had that discussion. Jeff and I were in Sacramento and I testified before the Senate on that issue, and that was enacted into our enabling legislation. And then it was trumped on top of that because it's inside the GSA document itself. So I think we got to be careful that we don't debate ourselves silly and try to rewrite the authority. The state has said you have this authority. I think the bigger question is, how do we exercise it correctly so that we don't create a whole bunch of unintended consequences? But the issue of having rights to go on property has been resolved. It was resolved by this agency 2.5 years ago when you authorized the agency to go to Sacramento. It took us a year, and we got that in our enabling act, and then the state came out with the GSA, which gives us that authority as well. But let's deal with the issue on how we actually exercise that authority. So I think those are the items. There's others, and what I would suggest is that staff has this copy, the public has this copy. We have a draft ordinance over here. I assume it's going to get changed immensely. I think in Mike and Jeff's comments to me yesterday was this document will probably grow from 3 pages to probably about 5 or 6 pages, depending on what they have to put into it and make it work. And my recommendation would be to direct staff to digest this. I think Charlotte was correct. Not everything that's on this piece of paper is going to get in, and not everything on this paper is going to be left out. I don't know where it's going to fall, and this is the process of putting it all back together.
If I could?
Yeah.
Two things I'd just like to offer to see if anybody has any other thoughts on it, or have staff at least hear it. On the issue of who pays, it strikes me that our guiding principles should generally be this, and that is, who pays? The people who want to take advantage of this resource are the people that should pay to take the resource. Now the question is, what do you mean when you say who wants to take advantage of the resource? If you could have it be that it's all the people in Fox Canyon and they pay for these devices through pump charges or through something, so we collectively pay, or does the individual who decides they want to put an X amount of wells and meters and they need to do this? In general, but we should try to link who pays for something with somebody who wants to use the resource. So in general, as much as we can, we should try to drive that to the individual. So the individual who is deciding to do something, because that's when you have the best use of a resource, when you link the cost close to the incurring of the cost to the person who's getting the benefit from that. So sometimes there's a collective benefit, and I understand that, and that's why. But as much as possible, that seems to me like you'll have the most rational use of any particular resource if we do that. One possibility about owning it, I go back to this issue of, think about your meter at home, who owns that meter, who owns your water meter, who owns your electric meter, and they fix it and all that stuff. But I know one possibility is there's some kind of charge, but the agency still keeps control. They keep ownership of it, but you pay a fee. The fee covers the agency's cost of doing it, but the agency keeps control of it. I'm not offering that all these as specific answers, but they strike me as things that make common sense to me, so I throw it out there. The other thing I just wanted to ask about the data, is the data public data once it comes into the agency, county council or Mr. Pratt or somebody?
Generally speaking, it is public information. There may be specific privacy concerns that would apply to a given piece of data.
I might offer something that we do sometimes, and that is we have data that is public information, but we don't necessarily put it on the internet for everybody to get all of the data, like somebody's address doesn't go on. But so it might be a property or something. We do that with campaign finance reporting. You put down, Gene West made this contribution, but you don't put down his address. But somebody can come here to the government center and actually get that address. And I would offer the places where I've seen, I was recently in Norway, and they have really high income taxes in Norway. And you would think if there's going to be cheating, it would be in a place with really high income taxes. Yet they don't spend very much money at all in terms of making sure people aren't cheating, because all of the data is public, and so everybody's watching everybody. And now, I'm not suggesting that would fly here in the United States, but it is not just public, it's online. So to the extent that the data is public, you increase the chances that you have lots of people out there making sure nobody's working the system, and that the benefits of that you want to try to get, and at the same time try to be as respectful as you can of abuses of that. You don't want to have somebody data mining and coming in and collecting all of that. it strikes me there's a way to do that. And so those are some observations I would offer as we're trying to wrestle with these issues. Thank you.
Okay, Dave?
I'd just be interested if there was anybody in the audience who had a preference on if, in fact, GMA were going to own meters and telemetry equipment, which has a certain rationale. I mean, what incentive does somebody have to fix something that's broken? If GMA discovers it's broken, we send out a tech to fix it. So there's a couple ideas about funding something like that. Grants, a special pump charge, or in fact, people just fund it themselves. What are people's preference? Would you like to see a special pump charge? Or would you rather just make whatever modification you need to do on your own meter, but in fact, that equipment would at some point belong to GMA? You're paying for it now or you're paying for it later kind of thing. I'm just curious, because we're going to have a fiscal committee meeting in another week and probably talk about this issue. If anybody wanted to venture a thought.
Yes, sir, Darrell. Alma, we're going to have you, if you take a seat, we're going to hear from some folks in the audience, possibly.
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Chairman Marhart, Board. My name is Darrell Smith. I'm a grower, and I do have a Centex mag meter that I purchased myself. And as you all know, once every 3 years they have to be calibrated. So I took the time and trouble to get some brochures and talk to the people that were marketing these items and to find out what it takes to calibrate it. Well, they happen to be located in Hemet, and like drillers, they charge from portal to portal. It's $125 an hour. So it is expensive. The good news is the price of the meters has gone down, and I imagine as they sell more, the price will continue to go down. But to calibrate them is extremely expensive. So when you talk about ownership, well, who's going to pay that $125 an hour? Or more importantly, can you bring the price down by coordinating joint readings and joint calibrations? And as individuals, that may be a little more difficult than if the staff or somebody consolidates that effort and takes care of it. So in ownership and in movement, you may take that in consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. I think we're at the stage now where we've had a good discussion. And Jeff, you've taken a whole bunch of notes. Do you have a sense of we're kicking this back to staff to work your way through that?
I do. We'll try to get it back to you at your June meeting. If that's not possible, it will come in July. There are a number of big public policy issues we're going to try to work through. I'd encourage anybody who's interested in communicating with us any comments they have. We'll talk about getting something up on the website so that there's an easy place to post comments and concerns. But I do have all the comments that your board made, and then those that were highlighted after the fact. So, if that's helpful.
All right. Are members comfortable with that's the direction to staff? It's nothing we have to vote on. It's just direction to staff, correct?
Well, because this is a noticed public hearing, if you want to avoid the need for another publication of the date on which the board will consider adoption, you would need a motion to continue to a specific future meeting.
Oh, okay. So can I have a motion? Do we have to establish the date that we continue it to, or we just continue it?
Yes, it would be a motion to continue it to a date certain.
Okay, so if we continue, but if we make a motion to continue it to June, and staff says they're not ready in the June meeting, we'd vote to continue it to the next available time, correct?
Correct.
Okay, can I have a motion?
I will move to continue the hearing. Do we need to open it first?
Well, the words were not spoken, but I believe that the hearing did take place.
Okay.
Okay.
I would move to continue the public hearing until I don't know the date, but the next regularly scheduled GMA board meeting.
Okay, that's the motion.
Yes.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any other discussion?
June 22nd.
June 22nd, 27th, right?
2nd.
22nd. That's your, yeah, okay. Aaron, roll call. Yes.
Yes.
Bennett?
Yes.
West?
Yes.
Butcher?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's go to, thank you, Alma.
Thank you.
All right, you guys got your work cut out for you. Very
Can I
good.
just make a comment? I
Yes.
do have comment cards for people that want to provide written comments. I placed them out in the lobby.
Okay, they've heard that. Thank you very much. All right, let's go to item number, we'll go to item number 2 then. Okay? Yeah, no, we,
We did number 4 first.
Andrew.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart, members of the board. I'm Andrew Sheldon, Staff Groundwater Section Manager, and I'm here to present the Groundwater Sustainability Plan update for this month. New regulations for preparing groundwater sustainability plans were adopted by the California Water Commission last week on May 18th, and there isn't anything there that staff did not expect, but I have more on this later in my report today. Staff has developed a stakeholder communication guide for our groundwater sustainability plan development process, and that guide is now posted on the agency website. It explains our overall communication approach, including updates to this board, the work of the charter groups, and workshops that we will be holding during the summer and the fall. Our progress on preparing the groundwater sustainability plans for 4 basins has been good. We've received draft report sections from the consultants for tasks 1 through 5, and these have been reviewed by the Technical Advisory Group, or TAG. We also have received draft report sections for tasks 6 through 10, including water budget, narratives, and active spreadsheets, and these items are currently being reviewed by the TAG. Our cost budget progress with the consultant is as follows. We've paid invoices up to approximately 17% of the budget and have not yet received an invoice for April. I estimate we have approximately 70% of our budget remaining to continue the development of the plans. We are currently working to resolve some issues with the contract. In my April update, I indicated that staff was reviewing the scope, schedule, and deliverables written into the existing contract scope in light of practicalities of the TAG review process and the then forthcoming GSP regulations. Staff is doing everything we can to deliver the 4 basins GSPs on schedule by the end of this year and on budget in accordance with our existing contract. However, it is incumbent on me to inform you that our consultant is now saying that due to the advent of the newly adopted GSP regulations, they are now unable to accomplish this under the existing contract in a way that meets the requirements of the new regulations. Staff strongly disagrees with the consultant on this. We believe the existing contract, which was written based on language in the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act legislation, contains provisions to cover all required GSP elements set forth in the regulations. The consultant has provided a preliminary list of items they believe represent changes in scope. Despite our firm request, the consultant was unable to provide estimated costs to cover the changes in advance of this update to the board. Staff is carefully examining all of our options at this point, including renegotiating the contract scope with the current consultant, performing all or part of this work using in-house staff that may require the hiring of additional staff to perform the work, and the possibility of terminating the existing contract and hiring another company to do the work, to finish the work. We are at a nice kind of stop point right now, having received the draft documents in Word format and the active spreadsheets and for the water budgets. We anticipate bringing back to you a detailed report at the next GMA board meeting, including analysis of the new regulatory requirements and either a contract modification with the current consultant or a recommendation to proceed according to one of the different options. That concludes my report.
Okay. Any director have any questions?
I
for
do.
Andrew? Yeah.
A couple. One, it's my understanding that the consultant has made it clear to staff and to the TAG that the current scope, budget, and schedule make it impossible for them to produce a competent plan. And in fact, they no longer even refer to their assignment as generating a groundwater sustainability plan. They view it in terms of a report in support of a future groundwater sustainability plan. They feel that beleaguered by the handcuffs on the scope and I guess the requirements of the new regulations. I trust that's what you're hearing from them?
That's consistent with what I'm hearing from them, yes.
I have a question as well. The scope and budget that we approved includes a scoping meeting between the consultant and this board. That's part of the scope we approved, the budget we approved. It's my understanding that the consultant has requested that scoping meeting with this board on more than 3 occasions, and that they have been told in no uncertain terms that no matter what the contract says, that will never occur. Now, I'm not asking you to confirm that, but I'm asking you to get that scoping meeting on calendar so we can speak to the consultant concerning the scope, the shortcomings of the scope, and what the scope needs to be for them to do a competent job, because my understanding is those items that they've produced thus far aren't worth the paper they're printed on. Would you do that?
I'll reserve judgment on that, and I'll deny that they've been told that. So let me, just a point of process. We're looking at all the options that are available to us. One of the things that we're unhappy with the consultants is that they like to come in and play off the members of the stakeholder community against staff. They walk into a TAG meeting without talking to any of us, tell us that they're going to be an increase in scope and cost. And they've done other things that are very suspect. They're trying to take advantage of a situation, in my mind, that they shouldn't be. So there's another side to what you've been told, and I'd be happy to discuss it with you offline. I don't think it's appropriate to try and negotiate a scope in here or give a consultant an advantage in here. So I think we should probably have that conversation together.
I'm not asking to negotiate with them. Their scope, as I understand the scoping meeting, the purpose of a scoping meeting is for the contractor to tell the hirer, such as it is, what they believe needs to be in the scope and why. Whether we choose to put it there is a different matter. But that's, as I say, that's something that we've already agreed to, already contracted for, and already put in the budget, but hasn't occurred. I just like to occur.
That's not my understanding of the scoping meeting. The scope is the scope. We negotiated with them. They have that scope. There is to be a workshop with the board. We haven't felt that they're ready for a workshop yet because they've been trying to work through issues with the TAG. But I've got to get more, I don't know who you're getting this information from, but I need to know what you mean by scoping meeting.
I'm not sure that at this time and place we can, I don't know if this is the time and place to try to figure out the scoping. I don't think you're asking for us to do that. My recommendation is that this is a serious issue. And I think staff has outlined that they are looking at some options. I don't know how those options are going to play out. I don't know which ones apply and which ones don't apply. And I don't want to be backed into trying to make some decision from this table on imperfect information. I think that's one of the issues that you're raising. So I would direct staff that we have to use all available tools that you have to sort this problem out and be able to report back to us. We're either on schedule, off schedule. if we're on schedule, what it's going to take. If we're off schedule, what is it going to take? And I don't think they've been able to get through all of that discussion yet. And it may include some of the things that Gene has talked about. It may include some of the things you've talked about. But I don't think we're in a position right now to arbitrate this issue at this point in time because we don't have that information. But it is clear that there is something that needs to be sorted out. And how we get through that, we need to do it quickly. Steve?
I appreciate the due diligence in terms of checking the contract and saying, hey, we need to have a workshop or a contract scoping meeting. I don't think it makes sense to have a contract scoping meeting with somebody that we may not be continuing to have a contract with. So certainly that needs to be sorted out. And I would I'd just like to offer what my perspective in terms of what's going on, talking to other people in the state. Because of the GSEs coming down and the Groundwater Sustainability Plan efforts coming down, the world is almost turned upside down with these consultants and everybody else. That there are, all of a sudden, there's this enormous demand for these people, and there will be many agencies that will literally be led around by the nose by consultants in this world. And the only agencies that won't have that happen will be agencies that have staff that are competent enough and strong enough to be able to actually deal with this difficult issue of signing an expensive contract to deliver a complicated product. And it's, it happens with software installations, it happens with all kinds of things. And so I certainly don't want to undercut staff. If we don't have confidence in staff, that's something. But if we undercut staff, I think I'm glad that staff said we're not ready for the scoping meeting yet. Because if we had the scoping meeting with these people 2 months ago and we find out we're not going to stay with them because of this, we would have engaged in that exercise for no avail. Now, you could make the contention that, well, maybe if you had it, you'd be in a different spot, and I can appreciate that. But at some point in time, we have to trust that staff is pretty experienced at managing contracts, and that's that. And so I want to, in my mind, emphasize that we should value the fact that we have staff that can do that, and there will be many places in California where there won't be staff competent enough to do that, and they will have real problems with these consultants going forward. This is a big, difficult issue that we have because of the demand for consultant services right now to try to get this done. And so I hope we direct staff to come up with their best recommendation in terms of how we move forward, because we are committed to moving forward on this. Thank you.
Charlotte, anything? Dave? Gene?
I get my principal concern is that the specific scope concerns, schedule concerns that I've heard from the consultant are critical. They're critical to the quality of the work product that'll get produced, and they know that. And in essence, what they've said, the only thing useful or usable in what they plan to produce will be the disclaimers that they build in, none of the data. And that's not going to be suitable for us to work with. That's my concern. And so I think you'd agree that's a process we need to manage. I'm not necessarily content that it's going to be managed until they're standing where you are, Andrew. And that's what I'm interested in.
May I ask, have you been in direct contact with the consultants?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think one of the, I know there are a number of folks that have their angst about public employees going on their property and the like. I get that. The other side of the equation is, I think one of the advantages that this agency has in our world, this $1 million plus contract, is a big deal. I mean, it's a huge number. Within the world of public works, that contracts that are managed. It's a relatively small contract. And these issues have come up before the county on the hospital, public roads, bridges, you name it. These kinds of contract negotiations with the consultant or the engineering firm or whatever, change order discussions. So I right now, I'm keeping an open mind to say to Jeff and to say to staff, this is your expertise. This is what you guys said you could deliver. You got to give us something to work with so that we actually can base our decision on valid information going forward, and we need that sooner than later. Charlotte?
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. My agency contracts for a lot of things. We are a small agency. We have 65,000 residents that we serve, and we have 135 employees. And in 30 years, we've contracted, I don't know how many services. We have one whole department. We contract with a private agency. And in 30 years, I have never been part of a scoping meeting. I don't think that's part of the board's duties. I think that we are a group of people who have various areas of expertise, and that's why we're here by our document that our enabling legislation. And I think we're here to give perspective and to have a lot of discussion and then to vote. But I think our staff is the one that has the expertise to be in a scoping meeting for a contract. So that's all I have to say. I don't know what I would lend to a scoping meeting in terms of giving them specific direction.
Okay. You've heard the discussion. You understand what you need to do. We've rolled this item, continued this item to the next scheduled GMA meeting. I would expect we need to get a update on it, or not on, or we're going to get an update on, I got myself confused. We're going to get an update on the sustainability plan at the next GMA meeting. That's a standard item. And we'll see where we stand at that point. And if we need something done before that, and it's appropriate, then we'll have to determine whether we need a special board meeting on just that item alone, because it is an important issue. Okay? All right, this is a receive a status update. It's a motion item.
Move to receive and file.
Second.
Motion and a second. Okay, Aaron.
Chair Mulhard?
Yes.
Vice Chair Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, let's go to item number 3.
Good afternoon, Chair Mulhart, Directors. I'm Tully Clifford, Assistant Executive Officer for the Fox Canyon GMA. I'm here before you today to discuss a request from the Satakoy Country Club. The Satakoy Country Club desires to be a good steward of our water resources and has contacted us requesting assistance in this quest. They are looking for authorization to invest extraction surcharges into their water conservation program. Basically, what they're doing is they're looking to use the money that they would have paid or have paid into a turf replacement program in order to reduce their overall water demand in the future. It's a multi-year program designed to enable the golf course to stay in operation while the program is undertaken. Phil Lopez, the general manager of the Satakoy Country Club, is here and can address any questions you have regarding that program. So we're here simply today requesting a start in this in order to allow them to use their 2015 surcharges as part of their program. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Does the board want to ask Tully any questions?
I just have one question.
Yeah.
If the request isn't granted, are they not going to go forward with their business plan?
I would ask that Phil Lopez address that question.
Hello, everybody. Phil Lopez, General Manager at Satakoy Country Club. To answer your question, Director West, we've already started the program last year. We invested $130,000 in about 5 acres of hybrid Bermuda last year. Our plan this year is to do the same this summer, to do another 5 acres of hybrid Bermuda, which is significantly more drought tolerant and better water user than what we currently have. Without some relief in paying penalties, it's very likely we couldn't continue. We can't afford to do both. We can't afford to pay penalties and try to invest in converting the golf course to something more drought tolerant. That's why we're here, to try to ask for some relief in order to be able to get to that point where we can actually accomplish what the GMA wants to accomplish, which is reducing our water usage 20 to 30% also, forever. That's the goal for us. So to answer your question, it would be difficult for us to continue if we don't get some relief.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? I read through the, I'll make comments. Nobody has comments or questions? Any comments? I read through staff's report. I read through your letter. And as I read through this document, it raised in my mind several issues that I want to address. I haven't made a decision whether I would support something like this because it raised a series of questions. So let me outline the questions. First of all, I think that this particular program that's being outlined here is the first or maybe a variation of one that we have done in the past on a small scale. And I think it addresses the issue that we may have to have some policy because it could, in fact, trigger a whole bunch of other folks wanting to do something similar or another variation. And then we get into 10 different variations of a theme. And the fundamental theme is the purpose of the surcharges was to disincentivize people to pump. And now we're going to say take those dollars as rather than a penalty, you're effectively over pumping and you can spend those dollars as well. So you're just playing back and forth with your own money. And there's no disincentive at all. There's no teeth in it at all that other people in this room may have to live with. I think that addresses a policy kind of issue that has to be addressed. And I think we have to address that policy because there could be others that are similarly situated in a future date. I have no idea what the GSP is going to require in terms of all of us getting within the tent. And is this a way of letting somebody outside of the tent to exist? And that has huge ramifications for everything that we do. So this resolution, as it's outlined, as I read through it, was a first cut. I take it as a first cut, but I don't think it comes close to answering the questions that first question. The second question is, I look at this timeline, and the timeline, effectively what you're saying is you're asking for this year's 2015 surcharge. I would assume that the follow-up would be, what about the 2016, 2017, 2018? And your timeline, as it's outlined here, takes us somewhere between 2019 and 2022. We said for M&I and for ag, we're going to try to get within a 20 acre-foot reduction to get ourselves through this difficulty period. And effectively, if we follow this outline, we've given one individual my term, not yours, a get-out-of-jail-free pass card that takes it out 7 years from now, effectively. And I'm questioning to the other folks in the audience, geez, how are we going to hold the line on their requirement to invest heavily into a system? Major groups are meeting right now across the GMA boundaries to try to figure out how we're going to get into this box. And all of a sudden we've left a door open with one individual that has 7 years, and in fact it's their money that's so the disincentive. So now I got another problem. So I have a problem with the years to complete. And I understand that there may be some technical issues because you can't just rip up holes 7, 8, 9, and 10 and call it a golf course. I get that. But that's a conversion grass problem, and it smacks right in front of a agency whose responsibility is to get us into some sustainable process, which we're not in, and others are trying to get there sooner than later. So that's a problem for me. Also, and let's see, I think that covers it. So what I would suggest to the board is that we not adopt this resolution. I don't think this resolution is even close to being complete. It doesn't give me enough to even make the decision whether to adopt it or not. But based on what I'm seeing in here, I would not adopt it. And based on what I'm seeing here, I would suggest that some serious discussion at staff level on what is the nature of the box that has to be put around this program so it doesn't take on a life of its own. And I think if you put that box around it, whatever that box is, then we present it to the public. I think the public actually has a chance to comment on something that actually has a box around it. Right now, it's nebulous. The timeline. I understand the difference between the timeline for pulling grass out, but there's also a timeline of when we have to become under safe yield. We are talking about right now from the special board meeting of putting into a policy those issues that address how some entity could come up with a program to process a new source of water and still have to fall into future adjustments to the GSP, whatever they may be, because we don't know what they would be. How do we factor that into this? And we heard a lot of folks at that meeting say we cannot create basically a get-out-of-jail card or a locked-in process that the GSP could never touch in the future. Our enabling legislation doesn't give us that authority, in my opinion. So I don't know how you build this into it. The timeline has to be adjusted. I don't know how you keep a surcharge in place that was designed to be a disincentive when you effectively eliminate the surcharge and you hand the money right back to the entity as the cash to fix what they need to do. I don't see us doing that to the growers. I don't see us doing that to the cities. So I have problems with that. How do we go through this, and let's assume that we deal with the first year of 2015 and 2016, and in those 2 years you got 10 acres coming out of high usage going into the new usage. What if the lawns that you put in don't meet the requirement of meeting the objectives as you've outlined? Do you still don't pay penalties on that and get to use that cash? What is the guarantee that over this time frame we meet the 20% goal? And in fact, over this time frame, you're really looking at about a 2.2% decrease on a yearly basis. What if you don't meet that? Does that mean a portion of the penalties are not refunded back or not rolled back? I don't know how we work through that. We have to come up with some method to make sure that the whole purpose of penalties were put in place to be a disincentive and not jeopardize everybody else that's faced with those kinds of penalties as part of their motivation to fallow ground and do all the other things that we're asking them to do, and cities to do all the things they were doing. I'm not trying to totally rain on your parade, but it sounds like I am. But I think our responsibility here as an agency is to be much broader in our horizon, and I'm sharing with you publicly those issues that I've raised as concern that I think staff has to address before I would even consider a policy, how it affects that. And I think that gives the audience a chance at that point in time to weigh in and say, that's fair, that's not fair, whatever the answer is. So it may be all that work will come to naught. I don't know.
Sure. Let me just say this. I would say that with regards to your last point about what happens if we don't get there and doing this doesn't actually accomplish the goal, we wouldn't be here if we didn't think that doing this wouldn't accomplish the goal. We know it's a scientific fact that hybrid Bermuda grass uses a lot less water than what we currently use, 20 to 30% less. We put 5 acres in last year, and our superintendent's here today. He would tell you those heads are turned down 25% now than what they were before. Now, that's a small percentage of what our total acreage is. I get that. We're trying to do this while we're operating. I could shut down the golf course and redo the whole place, and we'd be out of business.
Yeah, no, I understand
It'd be the end of us.
Yes, I understand.
So that's not really an option for us.
Yeah.
So what we are trying to do is come up with a program that would allow us to get to the point that you're trying to get to, a 20, 30% reduction forever. I'm not talking for 2 years. I'm not talking just while we're in this emergency scenario. I'm talking forever. For the next 50, 60, 70 years of Saticoy's existence, we would be a 20 to 30% less user of water than we have been in the past.
And I appreciate all that you just said, and I appreciate the, and I would truly believe you wouldn't be doing this if you thought it was a total waste of time. I get that. But from a public agency standpoint, there's got to be something that
Totally understand that.
we have to say that if you don't meet your targets, and I'm not waiting till 2020 to figure out if you met your target. If you're not meeting your target as we move along, I think the timeline has to be shrunk. You have to meet a target on an annual basis. If you don't, the penalties keep going.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know if that'll work.
And I
Staff's
think-
got to work it out.
I think the club would be very willing to go down that road. We would be very willing to look at that as a scenario. We're committed to making this change and making the scenario better, and if that means we have to commit to some penalty of not creating that scenario, then I don't think the club's going to have an issue with that.
I've outlined what I thought. Comments?
I agree with you. I think that we need to consider that the Regional Water Board has a program where people who get significant penalties and have a problem that can be fixed within a certain amount of time, or whether it has a relation to the amount of penalty they paid or not, under certain circumstances, and it always comes to the board, then those that money can be used for repairs of whatever it was that caused the leak, and that's specifically with sewer leaks that can contaminate the water supply. I think we need to look at something like that, but we also need to be assured that it's not going to continue, and nobody's guaranteed that it's our allowing them to use the penalties for whatever the purpose, whether it's for all the golf courses in the area. I mean, if we do this, we know we're going to be getting more requests from other golf courses. So I think we need to think about all of those things, but I think it is a reasonable request, and we need to figure out how to work it out.
Yeah. Steve?
Thank you. Strip it away from the golf course. We have all kinds of people that are going to have penalties and all kinds of people that have various options that they could invest in to decrease their water use. So what should be our relationship between those penalties and their decisions to decrease their water use? I think that my first overall response is staff. I think staff was premature in bringing this to us, because this doesn't have, if staff's not fiercely defending the incentive program of penalties, then I don't know who's going to. It's going to be hard. So when staff says, "Oh, this is okay," you have a tendency to think, "Well, staff thinks this is going to work," and I just don't see how this actually creates the proper incentives by itself. Because as was outlined, does this mean that they're automatically allowed to have all of their penalties go for turf replacement for the next 5 years, regardless of what we do? I mean, maybe we come up with a program that's very different, and if we're locked in as a result of this, that's one of the parameters, that you have. And the other is just, the idea doesn't, on the surface, sound to me like it's by itself creates the right incentives. If we just say, no matter what you choose as your replacement investment, you'll get to use all of your fine money for that, because it decreases the incentive it could, I'm not saying it would, but it could decrease the incentive. So not saying you were involved in this at all, but I'm saying trying to apply this policy to all of the potential requests we could get. I could see people saying, well, yeah, that might decrease their water use, but it also does X, Y, and Z, and is that really what we think the penalty money should be used for? So something better that maybe does have some penalty funds doing this, but in a very tight, narrow, as Director Mulhart said, with a box around it, so you know it doesn't escape and you get a lot of unintended consequences. There are potential unintended consequences in here that I think haven't been thought through. So,
Okay. Gene? Dave?
I appreciate the discussion and thoughts about, if we have penalties and they're intended to be, they're not incentives, they're disincentives. And then where we go and we start flipping the table around, maybe we don't even go there. What if, and in reality, we've talked before about having surcharges be set aside for projects, for ways to build pipelines, whatever it is, install filters. This is, in effect, kind of that thing. What if the penalties stayed on the books and weren't refunded until proof of reduction? Ultimately, it comes in the reporting, right? I mean, if they demonstrate a 20% reduction in reporting, then or maybe it's a stepped thing. If their project is in a stepped fashion, maybe the surcharges are stepped, have stepped reductions. In other words, we don't eliminate the disincentive. The disincentive still hangs in place, and the onus is on the operator to install the improvements to correspondingly reduce the overage that he caused in the first place. And that kind of thinking, that seems to make a certain amount of sense to me.
I think what you're hearing is that the world that we have to deal with is much broader, and you know this.
Of course.
And by having this open discussion, we're trying to think ahead of the game so we don't create a big nightmare for ourselves and everybody else in the community. Difficult times. The GSP process is an ongoing process that will never end. It requires 5-year reports to the state. It may have to have sooner adjustments depending on the assumptions we put in and what the reality says based on the meters and other things we put in place. So when you factor those conditions in with the things that each of the directors have kind of hinted towards, I think staff has a task before them to think through this. And it may well be that after everybody behind the scenes chews on it, there's not a lot we can do for valid reasons. And I'm not sure we're there yet, but I think we would be remiss I'd be remiss if I said to you, work it out, you'll get it. I don't know if that's a true statement because it has ramifications that potentially are not palatable to the water community as a whole because it doesn't work within the scope of the things we want to do. Okay? And I don't think there's any other fair way to say it other than that. Okay?
I totally understand what everybody's comments. I guess the only thing I would leave you with is just the idea that a few people mentioned the idea that if you approved something like this and everybody came to you with a plan to try to save 20 to 30% of their water, and we could actually accomplish that would be a good thing.
Yes. The question mark we have is we actually have an emergency ordinance in place, as you all know, that is in a much faster timeline than what you're talking about.
Understood.
So we may have 2 entities or 3 or 4 entities that are on different timelines.
And I totally
I don't know how we deal through that.
And I would totally get and understand and support the idea that it's got to be workable for everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not asking to be the exception. I'm asking to be the example.
Okay, great.
That's
Good.
all.
All right. You've heard the discussion. You've made your notes. Can we just direct staff to deal with this, or do we have to vote on this? Tell me.
think it's an action item. I would frame it as a motion,
To direct it to staff to work out?
whether to
Okay.
come back or, this is an alternative, you could just deny it outright today.
Okay. So can I have a motion to direct staff to think through this as we discussed and either bring it back to us or?
I would direct staff, to try to word this, I'd direct staff to try to come back to us with policy guidelines for this concept and potentially a revised version of this concept consistent with those policy guidelines if they can develop that.
I'll
Okay.
second that.
That's a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
Just one
Well-
little bit of additional thought would be, if there is a way to turn a disincentive into incentive, I think that is really powerful.
Okay. Roll call.
Yep. Chair Mulhart?
Yes.
Vice Chair Craven?
Yes.
Director Bennett?
Yes.
Director West?
Yes.
Director Borchard?
Yes.
Okay, we have a executive officer report. It's a receive and file item.
Move to receive and file.
A motion, a second. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, it's so ordered. Okay, we are adjourned.
I have one question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Somebody mentioned a meeting on June 1st. I don't have any such meeting.
It's
on my
a
calendar.
executive committee, oh, no. Fiscal, I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm not involved in that meeting.
You are not involved in
I was
that.
going to have to change some plans.
No.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right, so there is a fiscal committee meeting, June 1st. I'm trying to give you the 1:30, I think.
June 1st, not May 1st, yeah.
It's 1:30 to 3. It's 1:30 to 3. Oh, 1 o'clock till 3, June 1st. Okay, and other than that, the board will be adjourned to its next regular scheduled meeting, June 22nd.